All right, we're recording. It is October 15. This is Service API's meeting, and we've got plenty to get through. So let's start off just with a little bit of a recap of the V1 Alpha 1 milestone. We mostly went through this yesterday, and I think we've covered or discussed everything that is new now, but I just want to make sure we haven't missed. Oh, Harry got one that I didn't notice. You want to describe this really quickly, Harry? Or not that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, so here we have an example of doing a TCP listener. And if you observe, the default of hostname is hostname match any, right? Like that's the default for that field inside a listener. And that does not really make any sense in the context of TCP or UDP, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's the one I caught. I was addressing one of points that Tim has raised in the pre-alpha review doc, and I came across this. So we'll have to either not have a default for that field. So that's what I have commented below, that we have two options: either we don't default the host name field inside a listener, or we introduce a match type of none.
Yeah, and match type of none is going to be an unfortunate default. I mean, this whole field doesn't seem to make a lot of, like it's fairly protocol specific.
Yeah, I agree. So I mean, my vote would be to remove the default for hostname match field.
Yeah.
But in that case, the the getting started YAML becomes two more lines.
So we remove the default. Can we go a step further and basically say that this is the interpreted default, if that's a way of saying that? But basically, although we don't actually set a default for you, controllers should interpret the absence of a host name being specified here as match anything. Because I hate to require this field. Obviously, if this field doesn't add anything for UDP or TC, whatever, it doesn't. It seems strange to require it. So it seems like the best option is to make it optional. And if the protocol is HTTP or something like where that's meaningful, if it isn't specified, just match anything.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't have an opinion right now. I'll need to think more.
Okay.
Get back.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we haven't followed that pattern very much of the interpret a default without actually setting it. But I think there is room for that approach. I can follow up afterwards, add a comment here just for the record. But I obviously also have not thought about this very much, so there may be flaws with that approach too. Yeah, thanks for catching this. Cool. All right, the next one, I think we have almost entirely overlap from office hours yesterday, where we were discussing, do we want to revisit any of our resource names, and specifically gateway? At that point, the answers that I remember were gateway is still a very popular name, and it was chosen for a reason, and it makes sense. There is some hesitancy because it conflicts with Istio and others as far as a common resource name. We briefly mentioned other potential names we could look into: app gateway, router, and I mentioned what SIG multi-cluster had done when they were unsure about naming. And Jeremy had actually led this off earlier this summer. And yeah, they actually started with supercluster, which was always meant to be a placeholder. And they went all the way through a long list of voting, set up a survey, etc., and did a few rounds. So they got some suggestions here, put them in a spreadsheet, took out any that were really, offensive or didn't work or whatever, and then voted after that. And they actually ended up, I thought that they had settled on supercluster, but as I look back through, they actually settled on something like entirely different. I think it was cluster set. But you can see they got a lot of suggestions here, and they sent this far and wide. So anyways, this is the approach they took. I don't know that we have to, but it seems like there's at least enough hesitancy that maybe we can at least throw it out there, see if we get any interesting names. And if we don't, then we don't, and we stick with Gateway and we're done. But if we do, we vote on that, and maybe we still stick with Gateway. Maybe Gateway is still the preferred name. But yeah, I don't know. Anyone who was here yesterday or has any thoughts on this, do you have any new thoughts, any new names, any thoughts of maybe we should avoid this entirely?
One name that came to me was sort of being more elaborate, like app proxy or something like that. Because what we are doing is essentially, a proxy. It's a proxy layer, right? Like technically, which is also a very widely used name.
But does it have to be a proxy? I mean, couldn't a load balancer implement the APIs?
Yeah, I was thinking that we should try to shy away from specifying the implementation, which I think is why Gateway ran into trouble, because people have a very fixed idea of that a gateway is like a certain thing, like a box.
Yeah, I agree. Gateway does have that heavyweight sort of feeling or notion to it in the industry.
Okay, well, it sounds like there's enough interest to at least start the process and see what kind of suggestions we get in. I don't know that there's that much priority here, but I think what Jeremy and Multicluster did, SIG Multicluster did, seems to have worked pretty well. So I may just try and follow their process here for soliciting feedback and ideas from the SIG. Does anyone have any alternative suggestions or workflows, or does this kind of approach seem to make sense?
Yeah, I like the idea of doing a survey monkey or a spreadsheet and just getting it out and saying, place a vote, so that at least when it's all said and done, we can look back and say we did everything we could to try and get the naming down.
Yep.
Yeah, I think all the people who have API gateways can then just be satisfied that we at least went through the process.
That's a great point. Yep. Okay. Well, I'll start that. Obviously, I think we're too late into this, and we want to give this process enough time to get enough feedback and take the time to think about it. So this is not a V1 Alpha 1 thing, but I think if we at least start this process of getting community feedback, we can launch V1 Alpha 1 with a caveat that the name of gateway may change, so don't get too tied to it. Yeah. So anyway, with that, Harry had mentioned just before this that it might be good to update the pre-alpha review doc, which I had been keeping up with a little bit. I think the last time I updated it was around the last time Tim did an API review, which is probably a couple weeks ago, is my guess right now. Since we happen to have a SIG network meeting this afternoon, I think I'm going to try to update that doc once more to match our current API. And then I was hoping that maybe we could spread this to the broader community. If you have anyone on your teams that is great at API review and might have some good feedback here, I feel like this is a good time to really circulate our API. Obviously, they can look at the repo too, but it's a little bit harder to give feedback on something that isn't a PR, so that's why the doc exists. So if you, I can post something in Slack this afternoon once I've updated the doc to be current again, and maybe we can get a little bit more feedback here.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could provide a link in Slack after you update it, because I would like to disseminate it within Red Hat.
Awesome, that'd be great. Cool. And with that, I think we're good for PR and issue triage, and we've got plenty coming in now. So thanks. Harry has put in a lot of PRs. I appreciate that. And there's some others as well. But let's go through. I think we'll have time for all of these, so in no particular order. This one, I want to say this was resolved. I think I already approved. Did I approve this? Harry, what's the current status of this? I've lost track.
I think so. There were there was a life cycle problem, and then I sort of overloaded the PR with this other problem of what happens when the allowed gateway namespace selector is violated, and provision gateways problem comes up, and Daniel is pointing to a solution here. But I think we can punt on that because we are removing that allowed gateway selector as well as provision gateways field, right, for good reasons. So
yep.
This is almost ready. I think it's gone to the reviews. It probably just needs a merge right now. As far as it's a pretty small change.
Yeah, and since I am removing this in another PR, this diff becomes just this, which is, basically the suggestion to add this finalizer on a gateway.
That's right.
Cool. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I'll take another look at this as well, but this looks entirely reasonable to me. One question I'd have is if we need anything in the docs to describe this finalizer pattern.
You mean the concepts doc?
Yeah. Do you already? Yeah, I'm not sure where it would belong.
Yeah, maybe I can add this to the gateway resource. It's a gateway class resource itself. I can add in a doc line, doc line, which will get reflected on the references page.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. This one also I've approved. It just needs someone to fly by and do an LGTM. This is something like that I actually suggested, so I didn't want to be the one to unilaterally get this in. But it's a simple rename, and let me go down to some of the examples that you've updated. So it changes route selector to selector and route namespaces to namespaces, because this is all nested inside of a routes struct. So routes.route namespaces and routes.route selector felt awfully repetitive. One of the concerns that I had, and I think everyone had, was that in certain cases, if you indented a selector one level too far, it would have kind of catastrophic, it would apply to something like entirely different, where it might have applied to routes, it would now apply to namespaces, and that could get confusing. I think that's relatively low risk, and this would not be the first time YAML indentation was annoying. I like what Harry has done here. He moved this around a little bit so that namespaces came second in all our examples. So if someone is referring to our examples, they're always going to use this syntax where you cannot have that same selector indentation problem, which I think is a good start. And the other thing is the namespaces selector is only going to be used when you have from selector, which I don't imagine being super common anyways. So I think this, to me, this seems like a reasonable update. Does anyone feel compelled to add an LGTM to this one, or have any hesitation about this?
No, I have it up right now. Let me just take a quick review of it and I'll tag it.
Awesome, thanks. This one is mine. It is what we talked about yesterday and to a point last week as well. Kind of sad, but it is the end of allowed gateway namespaces. This one was, when I look back at the life cycle of this field, it went through so many iterations, tried so many different things, and still just could not get it to work. So thank you to everyone for the patience on this. But in the end, I think it probably is the best to pull this out, at least for V1 Alpha 1, and revisit this as we're preparing for V1 Alpha 2. And I linked to the issue that discusses this a little bit more. And also that includes a link to the doc. So yeah, I think this is straightforward. I don't know, go ahead.
Yeah, Rob, I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So with that PR merged, use of the core APIs, there's no functionality to restrict namespaces. So obviously then by default, routes from all namespaces can be used by gateways.
No, this is a little different. This is gateways can use any class and any namespace by default. That's all. So it means if you have a gateway class in your cluster, it can be used anywhere in that cluster. And which is not, you could say, well, we already have the same problem or issue with ingress. We already have, it's not necessarily new here, but I know we wanted to provide a better solution. So I updated the docs here to describe that this could be something administrators would want to do. And I linked to where we're exploring options in that issue. And, until then, recommend using a policy agent to enforce these kinds of policies. And hopefully soon we can actually provide examples or templates that people could use with OPA to make this even a little bit easier.
Rob, do we have an issue to track adding the examples? Because I think that's required, and we should be linking it from here.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. Yeah.
Like we shouldn't just be dropping it and then not having those examples.
Okay, yeah, I can do that. All right. The next one is probably something that needs a bit more discussion. So I am glad that we have some time now. Let me first just go to the diff. Actually, Harry, you want to provide a little bit of background on this?
Yeah, so this started, I think, from a comment from Tim, where how are we going to future-proof this protocol type? Where if somebody introduces a protocol, let's say FTP into this, a bad example, but has implemented a FTP route type. How, and then we decide to introduce FTP. How will that operate, right? So I talked to Rob about it, and I think I've borrowed this exactly how it is defined inside app protocol field in service, which was introduced in 1.16. So here, that's what we are here. And then I've gone a little back and forth between this change, where a protocol by itself does not make much sense in this API. It's the combination of the protocol and the route type, right? So I could be defining an HTTP, like we have HTTP and HTTP route resource in the core. Somebody can define an HTTP and acme.io/HTTP route resource, which can have a different connotation to it or a different semantic to it. So that's what we are here. James is making a good point where we are referring to the RFC 6335, which has service names like HTTP, FTP, but it does not have things like HTTP3, I think, or even UDP and TCP. So how do we define like those protocols here?
Yeah, I remember. Thank you for adding this PR, because this is something that would be good to have in for V1 Alpha 1. And I remember this discussion, and I recognize that app protocol is different than what we're trying to define here, but the general concept felt similar in the sense that we want to avoid cases where you have different ways to specify the same protocol, as an example. So we wanted to provide some kind of standard set that you could pick from, and when you chose that protocol, it meant that thing, and you specified it with that specific name, and then we also wanted to provide a way for users to specify their own custom protocols. And so this was the least bad solution at the time, refer to this RFC, which unfortunately is just service names. And as James points out below, it may not be specific enough for some use cases. Obviously, with this approach, you can always do acme.io/H2 or gRPC or whatever it might be. But it would be great if there were some kind of standardized list that included these things as well. I don't know.
The other thing this PR actually does is it removes the validation, the enum validation for the protocol.
Yeah.
I think that we can put in this resource. This one, I don't know if people have thoughts about it. We can improve. This seems like having something is better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would say is starting the API more restrictive is going to be preferable than less restrictive. And not to say, I absolutely think we should get rid of this. I think that we do want to support custom protocols, but maybe this is the best option we have right now until we can come up with a better and less restrictive list of options. I'm not sure. And the other problem with this list is that it includes some things that likely don't make sense for gateway protocols. Yeah. I don't know, Bowie or Danian, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, let me take a look. I'm sorry, Harry, I haven't had time to read through this.
No problem.
Yeah, I think James brings up a good point in that comment there. It's like the protocols that we currently cover aren't or don't reside in a specific layer of the OSI model. So I think it's hard to refer to RFC 6335.
Okay.
But you know, Harry, since this is largely borrowed from app protocol, Rob or Bowie, is there some history there on the decision to?
Yeah, this is something that I had discussed with Tim back in the day, and the goal was that we wanted to support as many protocols as possible here, but we wanted to avoid different ways of specifying the same thing. Like, we wanted to avoid variations in, say, capitalization or, whether a dot, whatever it might be. And so with that in mind, using some kind of standard list, in this case, service names, was seen as a reasonable starting point, and then using prefixed protocols like domain prefix protocols for things that were beyond that list seemed like a way to support custom things, but also have a common standard list that we could use here. Obviously, this list is probably not sufficient. It is, it is lacking key things here. And the solution in the current spec is just, well, I use a domain prefix thing for that, which may be less than ideal. Yeah, I don't know. This is a tough one to get right.
I wonder if one option would be, is right now we've got the protocol type values that include application level protocols as well as transport level protocols like TCP and UDP. Would it make sense to actually have two different, kind of split that into two and have app protocol types that are HTTP, HTTPS, some of these kind of custom level app protocols, and then have transport protocol types that would be TCP, UDP. I guess the question is, where does TLS fit into there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, splitting these up could add a bit more overhead for users, or even for validation, in the sense that someone specifies HTTP and UDP or something like that, right? And and you then need to add something to status or validate it with a webhook, or it adds one more possible invalid combination. But that would simplify what can live in each field. Well, I guess we may not come to a conclusion today, but I would encourage everyone to think about this and give some feedback here as you're thinking about it some more. Yeah. All right, the next one. This is a huge PR. Thank you, Harry. This is adding all our TLS documentation. I think you resolved most things now. What do you need from us to move this forward?
I think Daniel has added a review and I haven't got time to respond to it yet. So I think that's the one. If anybody has additional comments, please put in. But otherwise, this is, oh, I see Micaiah has also done that. Nice. So thank you for the reviews. Yeah, I'm going to get through the reviews. This is essentially taking the TLS examples and adding stories, like explanation around it. My personal opinion, I think that's the way we should have examples, right? Like if I just have a directory full of YAML files, it's pretty intimidating and I usually get lost. So I'm doing that to TLS. I've changed the website, it's embedding the examples as well. So let's get this merged in. Let's see how's the user experience of this. And if everybody likes the way it's presented, we can do more for other basic examples as well.
Yeah, and Harry, I mean, my stuff was all kind of little nits, but I definitely want to give you kudos on this because I thought the way that you put this together was top notch. So thank you very much. And I think it almost becomes kind of like a reference model for a lot of the documentation that we should do. So kudos to you. And I actually did the make serve and took a look at it locally, and it looks awesome.
Thanks, Daniel. Yes, and like once we have more of these docs, I also briefly chatted about this in Slack, is reorganize the website a little bit. It's like all over the place right now, but that's probably once we have some of these current activities settled down.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think just to echo what Daniel said, I think this is a great pattern going forward for how we can write documentation. I think you've set some good patterns here. I really love this. Like this is so cool that you can just embed an example. So we have everything in sync. And the structure here, it's great. So excited to see
it is.
more.
That's nifty how you embedded the examples, and those, I mean, those are the examples that live in the examples directory, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that caught my eye too. I'm like, oh, how'd you pull this off? That is neat. I've never done that in Markdown, so learn something new every day.
Yep. Yeah, you what was it? You filed another follow-up PR that added that functionality really quickly. It's a make docs add-in, I think.
We had to add a plugin to actually make that possible. So there's a commit in the chain, like git log, where it wasn't possible, but we added a plugin and added it.
Yeah, I tried to make serve initially and ran into that plugin issue, and so I made the docs and then was able to make serve, and yeah, it worked like magic.
Nice. Yeah, and that's hopefully our examples will never go stale, but we'll see. That obviously is dependent on the other work to actually validate our examples on each commit. But yeah, we're getting there. Cool. Okay, let's see, got a few more minutes here. So this one is also worth more discussion. I looked through this and I thought, yeah, we should just discuss this. So Harry, if I'm understanding this, you're trying to add documentation that you cannot merge listeners from multiple gateways, but you can merge listeners within the same gateway, right?
Yes, yes. This is primarily, like ingress resource, like we started, it has such a vague specification that some controllers do ingress merging, some controllers, have like a dedicated gateway for each ingress resource, and it gets so confusing. I think we have solved that problem with HTTP route now, because ingress resource is essentially HTTP route in the new model. But I think we discussed this briefly in one of these meetings, and so yeah, that does not make sense that you should not be able to merge gateways, and each gateway is a different network endpoint. So that's the problem I'm trying to solve. I'm not sure if this is the right way to solve it. I didn't know where exactly to put in the documentation for that. So, but this is where I thought like maybe this is a good place.
I think this is I think this is the right area to put it in. I think I'm glad John pointed this out as well. I think if you read the next paragraph here, because there's the paragraph and above describes a compatible listener, and then the paragraph below describes the gateway class collapsing compatible listeners, and it makes sense to say. I think this just needs a little bit of tweaking, but I'm not sure what it should say. That's a problem. Like I get the confusion, but I also haven't thought yet of how to reword this. But I think this is the right area, and it's tricky to get the wording right in the context of everything else saying compatible listeners collapsing, etc. But you can't collapse these one thing, but I think this is good and important to add.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm not super happy with what I have here right now. So this is more meant as a conversation starter.
Yeah. Yeah, let me think about this some more. I started typing a couple of things last night of, oh, maybe it could be that. No, I don't like that. Maybe it could be, and just could not come up with a good way to say this. But yeah, I'll think about this some more too. And if anyone else has any other ways we could approach this, I don't know. I think it's awfully close. I just want to make sure that it's not confusing with the follow-up down here. Yeah. Cool. Defaulting to same namespace and route selection. I commented here and I got confused a little bit. So in the past, when we've done defaulting, we've done it on the parent object here of route namespaces, because my understanding, and it sounds like my understanding may be wrong, but my understanding was that if in this case route namespaces was not set, the default would not get set down here.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think let me go back and try that again. I tried that, it didn't work, and so I was like, sort of, I don't understand how this defaulting and optional thing work very well.
Yeah, me neither.
So let me go back and see if what happens with that behavior. I remember I did try that, but it didn't work as expected. So I did like this magic. So I'll try to get that working, and if somebody else also can verify, that would be best.
So yeah, so I guess so this is optional, but it's not omit empty. And because it's not omit empty, maybe something gets set enough that this default applies. I don't actually know how any of this is implemented.
I look up to Damien on this one. So
Same.
yeah, I mean, if it's it's just kind of conflicting there, right? If it's truly optional, then it needs to include omit empty. We can make it required and default, and then we include the omit empty so that a user can have submit an empty or submit a YAML that where it's empty, and then the API server will default it for us. So that would be required omit empty and then the default.
So to clarify, optional in this sense means that a field can be empty, and if something is not optional, there must be a value there. And by putting optional on anything that has a default, we're being misleading because we're requiring some kind of value to be set there. So optional doesn't mean whether a user has to specify something or not. It means whether a field can be blank or not.
Yeah, and I think the optional or the required, right? When we're defaulting, I don't know what KubeBuilder, is doing in the background for that. And maybe it's worth testing, because I guess it comes down to, what are we talking about? Is it optional for the user to specify, or is the field optional as it's realized within the system?
Right.
So, I mean, unless you've got like what the meaning of that optional tag is offhand, what we have gone with is that we have been saying, I believe this is off of memory, but I think we've been doing where we say, optional, meaning that it's optional for the user, or I need to remember what pattern does anyone remember the pattern? Are we saying it's required when we specify a default?
Yeah, we used to have optional tags on default fields. We have since removed them and made them all with omit empty, removing the optional tag and adding a default where possible.
Because when we remove the optional, the default is required. We're defaulting, and it makes sense to remove the omit empty because, I need to go back and look at this again. Yeah. Even when I don't look at it for a while, I forget what that combination is. Oh, geez.
Let me go back and experiment too, and then we can come back. I think we can solve this problem on the call for sure.
Sounds good. And I definitely agree with what Bowie put in chat, that we should absolutely record all our confusion here and let maintainers of KubeBuilder know that these things feel confusing to us, at least. But yeah. Okay, well, thank you for this PR, and I'm super curious to figure out exactly what combination we want here. Anyways. And I know we're past time now. There's a few more PRs if anyone has time to take a look. But otherwise, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you next week.
And thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.